Yeah, well, it's coming up for 3 years now since the majority of the world decided to adopt the TPNW at the UN. But for the treaty to enter into force, we need 50 states to ratify. We currently have 36 ratifications, and that's in just 3 years. So can you tell us a wee bit about how you see the treaty progressing over the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think I think it's hard to say. We were projecting that the entry into force could happen this year. Obviously, we didn't naturally didn't foresee the coronavirus COVID-19 situation, which has kind of left many governments understandably scrambling and focusing on their public health situations in the short term. So it pushes back our projections a little bit on entry into force. I mean, it could still happen by the end of this year, but maybe next year. It's unclear right now because all the focus from so many governments is on the response, understandably. But I think quite soon we will have entry into force, and after that, I think you'll start to see. And obviously, a lot of this is dependent on what we as campaigners do to continue to drive the agenda forward. But you'll start to see the shift in how nuclear weapons are discussed. Not only, I mean, obviously, the civil society side, we've been, ahead of the game as civil society always is for quite a long time. But you also see that same attitude expressed, trickling into the media as well. I think the way that the media, reports on nuclear weapons quite casually feeds right into the narrative that the nuclear weapon states themselves want to have, which is that the idea that deterrence is somehow necessary for national security, and that it's preserves the peace internationally, that kind of thing. And that narrative goes pretty much unquestioned by journalists and is put out there unquestioningly. So I think you'll start to see with the TPNW, in force, and you see more pressure on umbrella states to join. And when I say umbrella states, I mean the states that are kind of complicit with the deployment or possession of nuclear weapons in some way. So thinking of like NATO states plus Japan, South Korea, Australia. You'll see a lot more pressure on those states from parliaments, and I think also that's when the pressure from the work that we're doing right now with local authorities and divestment will start to pay off, because you'll see a wider coalition of actors, not just civil society, but also in the private and legislative front, will start to put pressure on their governments to change the situation, because nuclear weapons will no longer, they'll be banned under international law. And as we talked about a bit earlier, that tends to, or history has shown that has an impact on state practice. So, I mean, it's hard to say a timeline on when certain things will happen over the course of the next 5 years, but I think we can be confident that the work that we're doing now, coupled with reaching that 50, will bear fruit over the course of the next 5 years. And I think it's even starting right now. I mean, the divestment initiatives have been really successful over the last few years and beyond, and we're even seeing some legislative victories or close victories on pushing things the right way. We had Switzerland, for example, a country that is not under the nuclear umbrella, but is strongly influenced by nuclear umbrella states. They decided that they didn't want to join the TPNW, and that decision by the executive branch, by the Federal Council, as it's called here, was rejected by the Parliament, who said that no, Switzerland will be joining the TPNW, and that set up this kind of constitutional crisis about who has the right to decide on that kind of thing. In Belgium, earlier this year, Belgium is a country that hosts nuclear weapons. We had quite a close vote, actually, where only narrowly did the government side of the equation, I should say the government coalition side of the equation, win this vote that would have meant that Belgium would have to kick the US nuclear weapons off its territory and sign the TPNW. So obviously that narrowly lost, but it shows that we're not as far away as perhaps most people think to making some concrete progress to nuclear disarmament, even some of the kind of entrenched contexts in Europe. I mean, Belgium is a country that has been overtly hostile. The government has been overtly, not the public, the government has been overtly hostile to the idea of the treaty for many years, and only narrowly did they preserve, the hosting of nuclear weapons on their soil. So I think we'll see some major progress over the next 5 years. I'm sorry I'm not more specific with dates. I wish I could be.
No, don't worry about it. That's all right. It's really great to hear sort of what our friends across Europe are doing and like the work that's happening there. So in terms of where we're at in Scotland, what do you think we can do once the treaty has reached the 50 ratifications and it is entered into force?
Yeah, well, I think now, and as we approach 50 ratifications, I mean, once we get past 40 and we're kind of getting close to that number, I think that's when we, I mean, not that we're not doing that already, but really kind of start to, double down on that narrative that, entry into force is coming quite soon. This is something that, you as a financial institution, or you as a parliamentarian, or, any other group, this is something that they want to stay ahead of the game on. You don't want, I think, especially for financial institutions, they don't want to be, they want to be ahead of the curve as it comes to these trends. They don't want to be seen as supporting something that the public is awakened to, that is, puts them in a bad light, and they're quite sensitive to how they're portrayed, on social media and stuff like that. So I think we can, that is to say, we should kind of push to achieve those kind of major victories the closer we get to 50 signatures. Not only financial institutions, but local authorities and members of parliament as well. I think another thing that I think would be quite difficult, to be honest, but I think it's something that is worth pushing for, and I think it's something that if it came from the Scottish side of the border, I think that's could be quite valuable, is this idea of participating in meetings of states parties of the TPNW as an observer. So what that means basically is that a country would participate at the meeting. It doesn't have any voting rights, but it can still kind of take part. And I think that the UK will obviously, Westminster will be quite strongly irked by that possibility. But I think it's something that could create some real tension there, which is obviously very useful from a campaigning perspective. So that kind of a call from Holyrood or civil society in Scotland, I think is something that could be very valuable. And it also shows internationally that there is this tension happening in nuclear weapon states. So I think in nuclear umbrella states or non-nuclear weapon state countries, they always want to see what's happening in the nuclear weapon states themselves. Is there that opposition there? Is the treaty having an impact in those contexts? So while it's much harder, obviously, to get the UK across the line than it is Netherlands or Belgium, those countries are looking at what's happening in civil society and in the public discourse in the United Kingdom and other nuclear weapon states to see what's happening. So the long and short of it is, make as much noise as possible when the treaty enters into force, and see if you can get some specific victories as it concerns major financial institutions who welcome the treaty, major politicians who welcome the treaty, cities, towns that join, linking it to the entry into force of the treaty, and also maybe that call for pushing the UK to participate as an observer. And I don't want to, I don't know. Legally, it's probably a bit possible, but even if Scotland doesn't have competence on issues of foreign policy, it might still be possible for a delegation. I mean, obviously, it is possible as a delegation of parliamentarians to attend these kind of international treaties, as we see with the NPT, and that's something that I think members of the Scottish Parliament would strongly consider doing as well. But even if you had a government delegation there, that might be a bit cheeky, but might be something to explore.
That was great. It definitely gives us a lot of work to be doing between now and entry into force, and especially thereafter.